Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast from Banter, where we review every single Best Picture nominee for the calendar year 2024. Right now, this here upcoming Academy Awards ceremony. Today, we are talking about none other than Christopher Nolan's massive blast of a film, Oppenheimer. I had to do it. It's low-hanging fruit. We just gotta have some
kind of puns, gotta be in the intro.
It's all right. Oppenheimer. I'm pretty excited to talk about it. If you don't know who's in this movie, you're sleeping under a rock. It's Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, Matt Damon. This was a pretty large movie, I would say, when it came out over the summer, paired with another film that we have yet to review. So stick around here on Backlot Banter for the whatever that other movie is. I don't know what other movie it could be.
Yeah, no spoilers.
Are you living under a rock?
But I'm excited to talk about it. We've got to do a little housekeeping before we get into the fine details of that movie. Last time we talked about Maestro Bradley Cooper's biopic. We got biopic 1. Here now we get biopic number 2. Compare and contrast them week to week. The scores, however, keep this in mind as you hear our thoughts on Oppenheimer. Maestro got a 7.9, which puts it one up from the bottom at spot number 6 on our list. Got 7 movies on there currently. Oppenheimer will make it 8. Where will it end up? I don't know.
We'll have to see.
Yeah, we got to discuss.
To find out, boys.
We got to discuss and deliberate after Abram warms up our thinking muscles with a little featured comment.
Warm your pipes, buddy.
Yes, I want to take us back to the Past Lives episode because we have a new Quest community member. Their name is Trow 1938 that commented in both Past
That's
Lives.
when they were born?
And
well, the other
it's possible.
The other 1,937 trials were taken.
That's a good one.
They also commented on Zone of Interest. The Zone of Interest comment is very insightful, but it's also very long.
Which means it's perfect for you to choose.
The Past Lives one is a little bit better tailored to this segment. I burnt up all my long comment goodwill on last week's episode.
On some great comments, and continue to leave those because we read them. We read them.
We do. But Trow says the following about Past Lives. The climax of this movie happens 35 minutes into it when Nora decides to stop communicating with Hae-sung and focus on her career. Everything after that, meeting her husband, etc., is just what happens as a result of her decision. It's a nice movie, easy to watch, makes no demands, but the storyline is sort of lazy, and there's really no surprise in that last hour of the film because she's already made her decision. Although I like the actor who plays Arthur, I think the film would have been so much better if Nora had no husband at home excuse to fall back on. Had a no husband at home excuse to fall back on. Apologize, Trow. Because the decision Nora already made isn't due to her husband, it's due to who she is. Nora already knew 35 minutes into the movie that Hae-sung won't ever emigrate, and Hae-sung already knew Nora wouldn't forfeit her Western identity. So you spend most of the movie watching a foregone conclusion. Good acting, though. It's an interesting take on the movie. I'm really interested in this idea of the climax being at the end of the first act. I think that's a compelling idea.
That was interesting.
I don't really agree with the analysis beyond there, but I liked that concept, so I wanted to show that. So thank you for commenting on 2 episodes. We'd love to get more feedback from you.
Give me a third.
Future ones.
Why not?
Repeat. Go for the
Thank you for commenting, as always.
This one, mayhaps. Well, Tanner, would you do us the pleasure of introducing this movie a little bit and giving a little plot synopsis? We'll talk about how important plot is to this movie, but what happens in Oppenheimer?
So in the film Oppenheimer, a massively popular film that we probably don't need to do a plot synopsis on, it's fairly straightforward if you are familiar with the goings-on with the life of one J. Robert Oppenheimer, who is the main character of this film. The film chronicles his life from the early to mid 1920s up through the 1940s, wherein he, of course, became the father, inventor, and face of the atomic program for World War II, pioneered the program going on in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where the first atomic bomb was constructed and detonated before 2 more were shipped off and dropped on the country of Japan to end World War II. The film was also quite concerned with the falling out, no pun intended, sorry, of this event. And especially with the relationship between Oppenheimer and one Louis Strauss, who was the head of the AEC, the Atomic Energy Committee, I want to say.
Commission.
At the time. Commission, thank you. who eventually went on to seek out a cabinet position, and that all sort of fell apart when Oppenheimer tried to sort of push his power on the atomic energy program and sort of steer the country away from nuclear weapons in going into the future. I did my best there. The film jumps around a lot, which I want to get into, but it's a pretty straightforward sort of biopic that's just sort of chopped up and presented in a differing order, as Christopher Nolan is wont to do.
Yeah. Can I maybe catch you off guard here, Tanner? Because your phone's not out to break the frame here. Can you also give us the nominations for Oppenheimer?
Yes, I can, Abram. Oppenheimer is nominated for 13 awards at the Academy Awards this year.
I mean, that's got to be close to a record.
It's got to be close to. I think the record's 14. I want to say.
Sure.
But we're also in the combined sound year or combined sound era now. So I digress. Oppenheimer is nominated for Best Picture, Best Performance by a Lead Actor, that's for Cillian Murphy, Best Performance by a Supporting Actress, that is for Emily Blunt, Best Performance by a Supporting Actor, that is for Robert Downey Jr., also nominated for Best Makeup and Hairstyling, Best Score for Ludwig Göransson, Best Sound, Best Director for Christopher Nolan, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, Best Production Design, and Best Costume Design.
Basically everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. It could have gotten others? No, not really. It kind of filled out everything.
It kind of fills out everything. I'd like to talk about the sort of prospects of the awards because this is the big kahuna this year. So we can talk about that after we dissect the film, as we often do.
Okay. Where would we like to take that first slice? Who is going to make the first incision into the dissection of this movie? Who's brave?
I can go.
Abram.
You got your scalpel ready?
I can do it. I didn't have my scalpel ready. Oh,
Sponge.
Okay.
Scalpel.
That's the fork that I just ate sesame noodles with. That wouldn't be hygienic to use in a procedure.
Absolutely not.
This is my second time seeing Oppenheimer.
Your name is Godwin Baxter.
Then it wouldn't matter. Second time seeing Oppenheimer. First time since the theater. We did see it again in the theater. And I mean, this is just a great movie. I don't really think that's in contest here at all. I think what really took me about Oppenheimer in the second watch is how, even though the film is 3 hours long, it's paced like it's 90 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean that as praise for the film. We move so quickly. It's edited so exquisitely well that you can never really become disengaged, even though the movie, when maybe directed and shot and edited differently, would be quite a slog, as we spent a lot of time just talking about physics and spending time with these cerebral shots of explosions. There's a very boring version of Oppenheimer, but this is not it. So I'm really taken by it in that way, and I'm really taken by how complex the screenplay is.
Very complex.
But I think my issue with Oppenheimer, and why it's not my favorite of the nominees, is that I do feel like there's a little too much going on in the frame narrative. Now, this might just be a skill issue on my behalf and my attention span, but
Share low skill.
I find myself not particularly invested in the character of Louis Strauss. And even though I it's my second time watching the movie, I know the grievances that bring Louis Strauss to going after Oppenheimer and how that affects the political ambitions of Strauss. I find that the interpersonal grievance just doesn't feel like, for me, it's played up enough to where Strauss feels like an antagonist as much as sort of like a C-plot. If we have the core frame narrative of the court case, and then the actual historical events, and we also have this whole thing with Strauss. And I understand the larger thematic purpose of this film ultimately hinging on a petty grievance. I think that is powerful and important to how Nolan is trying to paint the morality and interests of the people who committed the atrocity of dropping the atomic bomb. But I just think that it's a little bit too much for me, and I get a little bit encumbered in that particular plotline. But on the whole, I think it's just an unimpeachable technical achievement. So I still think it's a really, really great movie.
Sure.
I'll just say one word, which is ditto. I mean, frankly, I agree with you on all those points. I got the exact same criticisms, the exact same praises, and we'll get into those, but I don't want to drag that on and say the exact same thing again, so ditto.
I mean, Oppenheimer is a fucking staggering achievement of American filmmaking. It's Christopher Nolan, who is perhaps one of the, most exciting filmmakers on the scene today, being one that audiences will go out to see regardless of what he makes.
Made a backwards movie 4 years ago.
He did make a backwards movie 4 years ago, and it did, I don't know, pretty solidly considering it came out during the summer of COVID. I don't know. But regardless of that fact, he's also one that can consistently innovate upon his style and get big budgets to make things that he wants to.
Yeah.
I think those are all markers that make Christopher Nolan one of the most interesting filmmakers out there today. And he tackles perhaps one of the most perfect narratives that Christopher Nolan could. And it all started with a key sort of with that backwards movie, because actually Robert Pattinson gave him like a book full of Oppenheimer speeches, and that's what sort of spurred on Christopher Nolan to make this film those years later. But to talk about the movie specifically, I mean, it's a rock and roll biopic that also deals heavily with themes of power and politics and the dueling ideologies in science of theory and putting them into practice, and how those things can be twisted by those with actual power governmentally. I think this film is a lot about power, and that's key to the relationship between Louis Strauss and J. Robert Oppenheimer, as I want to get into. It's brilliantly performed, and yes, moves at a breakneck pace, but is perfectly reined by Christopher Nolan and everyone in the editing booth, everyone behind this, essentially, to be a rip-roaring ride through the mid 20th century about one of the most important things to ever happen in human history.
Yeah. And it's interesting that the movie continually calls attention to that. Like, this is one of the most important things to happen. This decision changes not only from the character's perspective, our lives, because they're dealing with it, but into the future. And I love the weight that makes it loom over the entire movie, and also then makes the movie feel like it's one of the most important things to happen, because it's one of the only times I've ever seen that kind of thing tackled with this much like blunt, just in your face. Yeah, we're showing it to you.
Well, I like this movie also. You guys are heaping a lot of praise on it. I think that it's really well done. I think I really did appreciate the pacing so much more on the second rewatch, second watch, my first rewatch. It just like flew by. Like, you guys are not joking that it's just like boom, boom, boom. We are in I'm caring about Oppenheimer learn that he wants to do theoretical physics right at the beginning. Like, this stuff is not that interesting on like a dramatic level, except that Nolan, I think, pulls out what is fun and what we want to see from this. I think he really understands as a director like what audiences want, and this movie gives audiences what they want in kind of a twisted, weird way.
And audiences gave him like $960 million.
Yes,
and counting.
It's not gonna hit $1 billion.
No,
it's not gonna hit $1 billion.
Please, for my draft.
I would love that to happen.
Yeah.
But I think that there's, we can talk a lot about the technical stuff, and we can talk a lot about the editing and the acting, and that's all fantastic. And so thusly the Academy is noticed, and I think that the steamroller that we've, been discussing of Oppenheimer is really true and is going to happen. But I kind of worry that the film is a little simple. It's pretty easy to understand, but it's kind of, well, my roommate put it like this. He was like, it's like the marvelization of history, which I think he's being a bit harsh. I don't agree entirely, but it is kind of like, let's get the team together. Let's, you're the best at math and you're the best at theory. And while that is kind of the real history, this movie really takes up the drama of this whole thing to 11, which I appreciate, but I also see where you could maybe be like, this is a real life
film dramatize something.
Why would it do that?
Why would a blockbuster drama film from the guy who made multiple Batman movies dramatize its screenplay? This makes no sense.
Screenplay. Boom, right there.
There it is.
This is the screenplay of Oppenheimer.
Why don't we talk about...
and have read, right?
Why don't we talk about
I followed along in the theater.
Nope.
Should we talk about the screenplay?
Let's talk about the screenplay.
Okay.
How do you guys... all of its complexity. Because this is... much like we were talking about actually last time with Maestro being a very different take on the biopic, I think that the multiple layers of storytelling going on in Oppenheimer definitely prevent it from feeling like a stock standard biopic. The levels that we have to sort of wade through and get through and then are pulled back out into, I think keeps this movie, I think it really does help its pacing in terms of we're always able to cut back into something else and keep the momentum going forward and shift gears to another plot point, which I think can be a little bit jarring at times. But for most part, the editing and the screenplay work together so well to where even when you are jumping to different characters in a different time period, talking about something even entirely different, it always makes sense. And I think that the screenplay is why the pacing is so good, is because it isn't that straightforward narrative. This happened, then this happened, then this happened. It's this happened, and then let's talk about that 20 years later, how that impacted something. And then because it's 20 years later, we know something else that happened, so that we can jump back into the past to that next thing. And the order can skip around a bunch without feeling like it's super choppy, because the movie establishes itself with this frame narrative that I do agree with Abram is, I think, for me, its biggest weakness, but also it's its biggest strength, because it's exactly why this movie and its editing and its pacing work so well and are able to wrangle like 30 characters and 3 timelines and different political ideations and stuff.
You say a frame narrative. There's really 2.
Yes.
We have 2 frame narratives here. The AEC sort of denial of Robert Oppenheimer's security clearance.
It's like what happened in Killers of the Flower Moon to Leonardo DiCaprio, and he's like had to stand up in the room. They're like grilling him.
Sure. and there's also Strauss's sort of congressional hearing, but when he is trying to become the secretary of.
It's a cabinet position.
It's secretary of
commerce.
Commerce. That's right. So we have those as these 2 frame narratives. Something that can only be done by the likes of like Wes Anderson to have 2+ framing narratives for your film. But we keep returning to them is the key thing.
Like all the time.
We return to them quite often. We use them as ways to introduce ideas, character conflicts, reveals, especially at a turning point, which I do want to talk about Strauss and Oppenheimer, because it seems to be an issue that you guys have, and also a criticism that I heard quite a bit. If there ever was a criticism of Oppenheimer, it's the last hour of it. So we should talk about that. But the screenplay itself here, worth noting that if you do flip through the soft cover screenplay of Oppenheimer by Christopher Nolan, it is almost entirely. He's going to do it.
I just want to.
It is almost entirely narrated in first person.
Hands-on.
Whenever it refers to Oppenheimer, it is referred using I. Except for obviously the Strauss sequences where Oppenheimer is not present.
Yeah.
But otherwise, every time that Oppenheimer is involved in the narrative, it is using first person. We're looking through Oppenheimer's eyes, which I find quite interesting as a way that Christopher Nolan approached the construction of this film. Because I think, especially from writing it from the outset, he's trying to figure out Oppenheimer, who is a gargantuan figure in American history. But also a complex man in his own right.
I think this idea of figuring out Oppenheimer is an interesting one, Chandler, because what I really like about the screenplay, although you might disagree with me about this, is I feel like Christopher Nolan doesn't have a typical reverence for the material.
Yeah, sure.
I think that Nolan approaches...
Unlike Bradley Cooper with Maestro.
Yes.
I think that Nolan approaches this as much as sort of a chapter of American history as a sort of larger philosophical warning about how this moment irreversibly changed America's status as a superpower in the larger geopolitical balance of the entire world. And obviously this film is in a lot of ways very critical of the American government, very critical.
But obviously it's worshipping Oppenheimer. Right. What Christopher Nolan is really saying that Oppenheimer was a good guy who did nothing wrong. As many people on Twitter, the best place to go for discourse, of course, obviously said. Yeah.
And so I think when Nolan approaches it from this critical way, and they get to sort of a typical reverence for the moment, you end up with a screenplay that is sort of unmoored from having to set up the expected moments of the aha moment of putting together the bomb or anything like that. It's a lot more concerned with just sort of treating the audience as a mature audience that is capable of understanding, and allowing us to sit with things like the what's the affair? His friend who's
Oh yeah, he's got a guy. There's a something affair. Yeah.
yeah.
It's like a
What's
with
the guy's
Florence
name?
Pugh.
Yeah.
No,
his-
that's Gene
his-
Tatlock.
Oh, that's
his
a different
friend who has a
affair.
name that I recognize, but
Yeah.
not from being like, hey, I'll find it. Don't worry.
The point is they drop things like that affair, but they don't-
Chevalier.
the Chevalier
Chevalier
incident.
not
The
affair,
Chevalier incident. They name drop that in the film before they explain it.
Yeah.
And they trust
Yeah.
that.
They name drop it a lot before they explain it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just an example of how I think the screenplay really trusts us to follow Nolan down this path of I think deconstruction has sort of become a cheap and meaningless word in a lot of criticism, but this sort of deconstruction of the general American reverence for the creation of the atomic bomb. I mean, like when I was in middle school, I wrote and got an A on a paper about like why it was really good that we dropped the bomb.
Right.
Really?
Yeah.
What class were you in? That's
It's
so crazy.
American history, and so like it's very
Europeans,
interesting.
take note. This is what they make us write about. In
That's nuts.
seventh grade.
If you want the counter programming from Abrams' grade school paper, there's a great H Bomber Guy video sort of chronicling the opposite side of that, of like of sort of the Japanese perspective on the war and how it probably wasn't necessary to drop 2 atomic bombs on them and kill hundreds of thousands
Well,
of
that's
people.
what's so interesting about the perspective that Oppenheimer takes is that it isn't reverent in the way that you're talking about. So many Americans may feel that way, but because it's through the lens of a complicated person that is Oppenheimer, and he isn't even like 100% positive that this is the right thing and wants it to be held responsibly, but he also feels that this is something that must be done because if it happens to someone else, or if someone else gets it first, that's just from the American perspective, like there's no way to get past that, and it plays with the idea of nuclear war in very interesting ways. But it does feel awkward to watch this. It's because Oppenheimer feels awkward about this, and he has these political disconnects from the people that are telling him to do certain things, and he has his history that plays into the Cold War aspect of this very interestingly. And I just find that the entire movie, through all of its characters and even their goals, no one is comfortable with anything. And there isn't this idea of like, oh, making this is going to make things so much better. It's just something that has to be done, and not only has to be done, but I think one of the most compelling elements of this film for me is the idea of scientific understanding being something that is so key to so many of the players in our films that are in this film that are scientists. Is the idea of researching and discovering something new and doing something that's never been done before is a drug to them, and they it's their art, it's their music, and I love the sequence in which he is told by Bohr to go study, and we get this montage. With one of the best pieces of the score. What's the cool...
Can you hear the music?
Can you hear music? Where it's this montage of him not only learning about physics and quantum physics, but also visiting museums, and the music is swelling, and he's looking at art, and there's
he's
music,
looking at like
and it's
Picasso.
just like, oh.
Yeah.
And all these sort of
I think Nolan is being very
and,
intentional with the art that he's having Oppenheimer look at.
Sure.
Yeah.
To speak to what you were saying, Tucker, about science as a theme, not a theme that is typically tackled in mainstream American film. I adore how Christopher Nolan sort of employs that, and what he sort of threads through Oppenheimer as a character, that he is, as you're saying, blinded by the prospect of scientific discovery.
Yeah.
That he is so single-minded in his pursuit of theoretical physics, that's his field of study, and the idea of, sort of pushing the bounds and taking theory, which he is almost exclusively interested in, and putting it into practice, that he seeks out routes of power to do so. As soon as Groves, Matt Damon's character, no, I think it's Josh Hartnett's character, excuse me, tells him that, like, hey, because you're, like, friends with all these communists, they're not letting me tell you anything about the project, which everyone knows is the atomic bomb. And he's like, oh, really? And then he drops those connections. He drops them like a bad habit.
Yeah.
And
then as soon as Matt Damon shows up, he's immediately like, oh, I know how to do this, and we'll look at these people, and we'll set up 4 things here, and the X in the middle, and boom, boom, boom.
So yeah, he has this single-minded pursuit of putting his physics into practice, and that's something that's talked about a lot too, is practice versus theory. And he never stops once to think about, and this is like the original sin that has led to, you know, sort of nuclear brinksmanship and the prospect of total nuclear holocaust and everything. He never stops to think, and neither do any of the scientists really, about why should they do this? You know, what's the...
I don't know. I disagree, because I think that a lot of the conversations between them isn't should they do this, but is them putting their contribution to this going to make things better for them? Is that going to end the war in a way that they are comfortable with? We see so many of them wrestling with the fact that they have done something terrible after it happened.
No, it's after it happens, though. That's the key thing, is that it's after it is taken out of Oppenheimer's hand.
I guess that's true.
The key shot is when, I'm sorry to just, like, take the reins on this, but it's when the two bombs are on the trucks driving away, is when Oppenheimer's like, oh, fuck. I think I might have screwed over everything, and then the rest of the movie is him reckoning with that. It never really occurs to him, and even if it does occur to him, he completely ignores it.
That's the central idea of this whole film that I really like and I really gravitate towards, is this the regret and the dealing with the ramifications of it. I mean, I think that Oppenheimer has kind of a power. He has a power hunger for being able to control. He is, you know, I think, driven to create the nuclear bomb because of a fear and a need to have him have it and have the U.S. have it, as opposed to the Germans. And there comes a moment where later in the film they kind of begin to question, because like, Germany's out of this war, like, that reason for us to create it isn't there anymore. But I think that there's this underlying, like, it's going to be made no matter what, like, idea that was kind of pervading at least a justification that these scientists are telling to themselves. And so it's I think, very excellent characterization that makes us, you know, really feel for Oppenheimer in being like, I need to make this, I must make it. And then, you know, like you said, like, those bombs drive away on the trucks, and he doesn't get told when they're going to drop. He finds out on the radio, like with everybody else. And I think that a couple of times in the film, some of the other, like, socialist characters say to him, like, they need us now, but when they don't need us, what are they going to do to us? And that is also a very powerful theme that the film expounds upon in the later half, which I also don't like as much as the first half, but it's like, that's kind of where the meat of this movie is it not?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it depends on what your focus is in Oppenheimer, because for me, that first 2/3 leading up to the end of the Trinity test and them setting off the bombs and him reconciling with that is where I like everything for me. That's Oppenheimer. It is watching him choreograph all these people and build up Los Alamos and visit the desert and talk to his brother and deal with the socialist communist tensions and meeting Matt Damon and having the affairs with Gene, and like all of these things are like what I think of when I think of Oppenheimer. And so, well, you might say that the meat of the movie, maybe in terms of like its political themes or the focus of the regret in that ending section, might be where you find the meat. I really do think that the bulk of this film is in time wise that first part, but is in the building up to the moment. That I am so locked in for every character that he meets and all the ways that they're introduced, and that the parties that he's going off to, and then he has to like sneak in the back to like make sure that he doesn't get caught, and like there's all these things, and we're jumping up to other timelines. I think that first, not even 2/3, because I think it's more than that. I think it's like the first 4/5 of this movie. I think are just like so well done, and I definitely, as Aaron was talking about, fall off quite a bit at the end. But no, I find the meat to be absolutely in that build up, and obviously the Trinity test and all that.
I think it ultimately depends on if meat is like thematic meaning or like filmic spectacle.
Yeah,
because when you have, it's a really interesting thing about the descriptions in the script being written from the eye perspective. I think that when your film is this subjective, and as Nolan said, the black and white and the color play with these notions of subjectivity and objectivity, but when the vast majority of your film is subjective and it's framed around this person's largest achievement, you're, I think, inherently going to become far more immersed on your way to that achievement, because the film at every level is constructed to put you in the mind of Oppenheimer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that when he has that revelation that he's lost control of the bomb, the film has a hard time like zooming out and becoming more about the larger political ramifications and interrogating Oppenheimer, because the entire movie is not that. The script is asking you to be Oppenheimer. And then when it's asking you to be critical of Oppenheimer, I think it's just not equipped in the same way.
Sure. I would just contend that the whole time through and through that Christopher Nolan is concerned with this figure of J. Robert Oppenheimer, and that especially in how he sort of directs his longtime collaborator, Cillian Murphy, to portray this character. And Cillian Murphy does a fantastic job embodying him, because he is, as I mentioned, such a complex figure that I think Christopher Nolan is trying to unpack over the course of 3 hours. And I find it so interesting, especially from where Oppenheimer starts as a seed of a character from the opening minutes here. When we see him back in the 1920s going to school at Cambridge, I want to say, one of those schools, and it's he's just like lying in bed, like eyes wide, as he sort of gazes into this thing that only he can see, these atoms smashing into each other and spinning around at high speeds, and the way that those are displayed filmically are beautiful as well. And how he like almost poisons his teacher, who he adores. Like, what is going on with this guy from the very outset, and how he turns into what Oppenheimer is sort of known as, if you're sort of familiar with his historical figure, which is a public figure cowboy physicist who fucking had sex with lots of women and chain smoked and met the president and owned a ranch. He's like, what is the deal with this guy? And that it becomes clear to me, I feel, that all of that is sort of a shield from what he truly is, which is like an exposed nerve who can see things and experiences things and thinks about things in ways that nobody else really does.
Yeah.
And I think Nolan also deconstructs that the myth of like the tortured genius by saying like, hey man, you might be like smarter than everyone, but you still fucked up royally by doing all of this. And you couldn't look past your own hubris.
Yeah. And it is in that exposed nerve element that I do agree is absolutely the heart of Oppenheimer, and where I found the most resonance with him seeing science as an art and something that he's hungry for. That is the best part of Cillian Murphy's performance. The way that element of his character ebbs and flows throughout the film, and we get moments of him having a discovery or having a conversation, then dealing with the ramifications. And it is in the moments of Cillian Murphy with his eyes completely glazed over and just his mind is a million miles away, or that he's, as you said, like seeing things and imagining things that have never been thought possible before, I think is where that performance shines its brightest and is easily his defining performance.
Absolutely.
I've always thought that his performance was amazing, but watching this time, like, of course he should win Best Actor.
Yeah.
Like, I'm watching it on the screen, I'm seeing this man make faces and like show emotions that are so complex, because obviously only one man has ever experienced these things. I'm like, Jesus Christ. He is so in on this that watching these emotions on his face like allow you as a viewer to get a glimpse into the mind of a guy who's no one has ever experienced anything like that before and never will experience anything like that before. It is singular in a way that very, very, very few performances have ever been. And I do think that it is that exposed nerve element that really runs through the entire thing that makes it still so grounded, even as he's creating things that we can't imagine because we're not physicists, and meeting people and doing things in a time period that we're not familiar with. The exposed nerve element keeps him a grounded, relatable person through all of that.
You know what? I want to talk about my favorite scene where the synthesis of everything of this whole movie, like the themes and the performances and the filmmaking come together. It's in the like basketball gym / lecture hall after the bomb has gone off, in which Nolan really pulls out his realistic depiction of a panic attack. And while that's that's a joke, it really is, I think, my favorite scene of this whole movie, in which
absolutely me too.
This kind of, it's like so raw and so emotional as these people are really celebrating the dropping of the bomb, and it kind of hits Oppenheimer in the moment, like everything that's like gone horrible, and like what this really means, what it really means that the bomb got dropped. And yet the fervor and the jingoism, the nationalism of everybody in the room that is like just like pouring over, it's like extremely powerful. And it gets to the heart of this like real regret and central conflict that is being explored throughout the whole film of like, okay, so they did this thing, like how do they deal with it? And I think that this way of like the way that Nolan like intercuts and adds in all kinds of extra stuff. I think I kind of want to hone in on how this film really operates like as a movie and like not as anything else. It is unafraid to just like be cutting between non sequiturs, I would say, but they are like so logical. You move from one thing, and in the filmic language, he's like, boom, now Nolan is sitting naked in this room. And it's like, clearly that's not actually happening. And like, this isn't real, but we're in that subjective mind. We see all these cuts in a way that like shift our perspective. In that basketball scene, in this speech scene, like when he's leaving, he like kind of like stumbles off the stage and walks out of the room. And at one point he steps into the like fried carcass of someone, of a victim at Hiroshima. And like, that, clearly not real, but Nolan, I think, expertly uses that. You could say it's ham-fisted, but also I think it's completely necessary for that moment in the scene.
I think it's normally fisted. Frankly, I think that's the best. I agree, it's totally the best scene in the movie because I think that it also is where the editing, those non-diegetic elements that you were mentioning, I think
the sound is great, the visuals are great.
The sound design I was going to get to, but one of you mentioned this earlier, but I think another one of my favorite elements of this film that makes it feel so distinct and like a distinct vision is the physics, the cutaways to physics. Like these are like rays of light and beams and explosions and things. I'm like, frankly, I don't even know how they filmed that, or like if it might just be CGI or something.
It's not CGI. It's not CGI.
Oh, sorry, Nolan. But the fact that it contained these like experimental shots, like you could, if the movie was like 5 minutes of that, you would just call it an experimental movie. But there's 5 minutes of that interspersed in one of the highest grossing movies and highest reviewed movies of all time. Yeah. And that is so special. And those show up in that moment. And the sound design is, obviously the visuals are focused on the patriotism and the performances at its best. But the sound design is staying away from that. And it's just Oppenheimer's breathing like this low rumble. And you get this really interesting like visual element that the film plays with throughout, where the world around Oppenheimer is shaking and you can like hear the vibrating of atoms or something like that. I don't know how they did the sound design of that, but it like grounds you in this reality. And then his breathing stops and he says a word, a series of words, also known as a sentence, to these people that he obviously doesn't really believe in.
Maybe.
That he doesn't believe in, but he's saying to placate them.
Yeah, but what does he say? I think his specific words in that scene are really powerful. Especially the last ones where he's like, too bad we didn't have it in time to do it to the Germans. Like that kind of, I think, really encapsulates the mindset that they had. Yeah, and everyone like, it's chilling. It's just really chilling to see that the celebrating, and the film spends a bit of time afterwards, like I would say, condemning that emotional response, like in which they all learn about like what happened to the people at Hiroshima. But the subjectivity of this film precludes the full understanding of these events, and so I think that there is I've heard this argument a lot that people kind of want more sensitivity about the actual atrocities. They want a bit more of a reckoning of these specific, bombings in Japan. And this film just doesn't deliver on that. I think the reason is because it's a subjective film that's about Oppenheimer, and it's clear, it's written first person. I think it's still filmed in a first person way. So I don't know. Do you guys do you think that that's like an important missing element of the film or not?
It's just, it's something that Oppenheimer never experienced. It's the subjectivity that you're talking about, Timo. I mean, there is, of course, the moment a little bit later where he is shown like a slideshow presentation, essentially, of the victims of Hiroshima. But like, Nolan doesn't show that because he's like, ultimately, what would do I show the audience that? Like, what effect would that have, essentially? So I think that's good. The one moment that we do get something resembling that is in that gym scene when he is sort of fully engrossed by the panic attack, as you said, Timo, and you see a brief glimpse of this woman who is bathed in this bright white light, and her skin is peeling off. This is done with practical makeup effects, of course.
Not CGI.
Not CGI. That woman, portrayed by Christopher Nolan's daughter.
Whoa.
And I actually have heard about that. He puts his children in cameo roles in his movies in horrible situations to make him feel like the weight of it.
It's exactly what I was going to get to.
Yeah.
Is that we can get to Christopher Nolan sort of if we want to, how this movie is about him and his tendency to have self-insert characters, casting leading men who look like him, whether they be Leonardo DiCaprio or Robert Pattinson or Guy Pearce or whatever. But I think it is an interesting approach from Nolan to put his daughter in exactly that scenario to do what Tucker just said.
I've never been sympathetic to the Oppenheimer should show the Japanese perspective or anything like that. Just in that, again, I don't necessarily think the film is overly concerned with that.
Mm-hmm.
Because the movie has higher ambitions than simply to illustrate the lack of thought or the lack of morality around the dropping of the bomb. It almost feels tired to bring up with the whole, well, we're not going to drop on Kyoto because I've gone to Kyoto, a vacation in Kyoto. It's a beautiful city. It means too much to the people of Japan. The film is, in my opinion, ultimately concerned with the sort of like hubris that comes from being a world superpower like the United States and having the ability to do this,
to make those choices,
to make these choices, and to not have the world change as a result. A really interesting thing somebody said on Twitter is they were showing footage of
best place for discourse
of a bombing in Gaza, and they were saying if this happened in the United States or in London, the entire world would be different overnight. And I think that what this film is doing in some way is saying it's ultimately not important to show the effects of what's happening in Japan because the people making the decisions don't give a fuck at all. It's not even part of the calculation. It's about how America can end the war.
Yeah, it's as much as people have sort of joked about it, about Oppenheimer being a 3-hour movie that nearly made $1 billion about men talking in rooms. That's the point as well, is that all of these decisions, these decisions that change the world were all done in boardrooms with like fluorescent lighting. And that's it. Like that's just kind of how the world shook out in the 20th century. I think those sequences are also important. That one in particular, because yes, it's overtalked, but also I'm going to scratch Kyoto from the list is a fantastic sort of encapsulation in a line in itself. But to talk about the thing I had mentioned earlier about the power being taken out of Oppenheimer's hands, this idea of yes, he was the inventor, he's the fucking cult leader of Los Alamos, as Lewis Strauss called him. But as soon as he is not needed anymore, the power is stripped away just as easily as it was given to him. So he never really had it to begin with, if it can be just taken away just like that. And the real power is concentrated in these fucking suit and tie guys sitting in Washington.
We never
making
learned
these
a lick of
decisions.
science. They were, what is Strauss has a line about that.
And when Oppenheimer is in that room, he throws out some ideas, sure, but he never really makes an impact on their decision making. He is largely powerless in that scenario.
And also in this situation where he's talking to the president.
Exactly.
He's saying things and he's trying to get a point across, but he's never standing up for himself enough or saying it confidently enough to actually get something through, mostly because all these people are just talking to him for show, like they don't really care what he's saying. But I do think that is an interesting element of his character that I think is also like brought to the forefront in the moment where his wife Kitty says, like, why aren't you standing up for yourself? Is that he has this power, he has this knowledge, he is a respected figure, but he is not one that is taken seriously by the people above him in power. And it's that interplay of him realizing that he has power because he is a smart guy who is respected and well known, and he's a cult figure. But he also doesn't. He also has less power than he would want.
Yeah,
he wants to be able to make these changes, but he's constantly denied. And I think that where I do find the most connection between the frame narratives and the themes is in that connection, in that watching him be grilled in this tiny little room over and over again, and like kind of meekly like responding to these things, I think does play into this idea of power and where Oppenheimer has power and where he doesn't, and how that plays into his personality.
I think it's in some ways, my reading of that is in some ways different, because I think maybe the most interesting exchange in the movie to me when it relates to Oppenheimer as a person is when he and Kitty are they're like walking away from the house at the very end of the movie, and she says to him something to the effect of, do you think that this trial will make people think differently about you, make them forget what you've done, or it will some way become like an atonement or forgiveness for what you've done? And he says, give it time. And he also, when he's speaking, I can't remember if it's to his lawyer or to somebody, when he's dropped back off after one night of the of the trial, they ask Oppenheimer, well, why do you keep going back? Why do you put up with this? And he says, well, I have my reasons. And there's this interesting notion in the film that Oppenheimer almost through his ego needs this sort of self-flagellation to atone for what he's done, and this view in his mind that if he puts himself through this court, it's not even a court case, I don't know what you call it.
It's just a hearing.
It's the hearing over his security clearance. It in some ways absolves him of what he's done. And this is an idea that Einstein poses towards the end of the film, again, when it relates to an interpersonal thing of the people who have wronged you, Oppie, they're going to give you an award one day, and they're going to, pat you on your back, but it's going to be for them.
Right.
It's interesting how many of the characters in this film are really solely concerned with their personal image.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Oppenheimer is no different. I think that it's not, in my mind, Oppenheimer is really not different from the people above him. He doesn't have power because Christopher Nolan, I think, is also smartly making this larger structural point in the ways that Oppenheimer is surrounded by practicing leftists earlier in the film. He's making a structural point about labor, I feel. So yes, Oppenheimer is disempowered, but he's not oppressed. He wishes he had the power back. He's not that different from the president. Yeah. He's not that different from any of these people. As much as he's like wringing his hands, he's wringing his hands because suddenly the achievement doesn't feel so good to him.
Yeah. It goes back to what I was saying earlier, wherein like he seeks out that power for his personal gains, which are, sort of bringing these scientific ideas that he has, this theory, to fruition. That is Oppenheimer's goal for the first half of the movie. And then, like I said, the power is stripped from his hands. He had the opportunity to step away at any given moment. He was confronted again and again with people saying, hey, Oppenheimer, hey, should we be doing this? Should we complete the building of this? Should we complete the testing? That happens for a couple different characters tell him that. Or think of like David Krumholtz's character Isidore Robbie is like a conscience figure in the film, essentially. And Oppenheimer just hand waves them away for the purposes of completing his goals, not realizing what would happen eventually. I believe it's a Robert Downey Jr. line in this film that genius does not equal wisdom, and that is no better exemplified than the actions that Oppenheimer takes leading up to the construction of 2 more atomic bombs that are shipped off and dropped on Japan, that he could have took. It also comes about at the very end, which is one of the most fantastic, like, just one guy sitting in a chair performances from Jason Clarke. When he's grilling him on the fucking, when did you develop these moral scruples? And of course, they're doing it for their own means, but he brings up a good point. Yeah. Why didn't Oppenheimer object to this stuff beforehand? It's because he wanted the glory of it all. And while Robert Downey Jr.'s Louis Strauss makes that point for the wrong reasons, the point stands nonetheless.
Yeah. Yeah, very good points.
I'm interested also in where Strauss comes into the whole thing.
Sure.
Because when we boil down the grievance between Oppenheimer and Strauss, it comes back to this shipping of isotopes.
Yeah.
I forget where they're shipping them to.
Norway or something.
Shipping them to Norway. They're trying to decide if it's a good idea or not. And
Sandwiches, beer, etc.
Shovels, things like that. Yeah.
Oppenheimer embarrasses Strauss very publicly
Mm-hmm.
in court. And it's told to us, and this is reinforced in the narrative several times because we continue to cut back to this scene. It's one of the scenes we end up back in the most often. That this is the pivot point upon which the decision to slam Oppenheimer lies.
Hand over his security file to Pat. No, not Pash. David Dastmalchian.
Yeah,
His guy.
David
Yeah.
Dastmalchian.
Starts with a
Bromer.
Borden?
Bromer.
Borden,
Brumgard.
something like that.
Borden. Borden is
Borden.
It's
That's
like
very
the
good.
milk.
Yeah.
Pash is Casey Affleck. But it's also a interesting sort of condemnation on the morality or the like hierarchy of priorities of the U.S. government and its cabinet members that Strauss had a personal grievance.
Yeah.
And the personal grievance is what sent him after Oppenheimer, not an objection to what Oppenheimer did.
Mm-hmm.
Strauss is painted through conversations with Alden Ehrenreich as somebody who is really unconcerned about anything other than optics. And it's not a particularly new depiction of American politics, but I think it is well handled in that it showcases the pettiness and again the continued lack of challenge as to the dropping of the bomb. There's not a single like character of any sort of I don't know, it's not power. There's not a single character. There's not a character of any real weight or importance who has any sort of scruples over what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Until Oppenheimer, it feels scruples because it's to his benefit. You don't see a single mention in the confirmation of Robert Downey Jr. that you were involved with the dropping of the bomb, or you didn't like Oppenheimer because he dropped the bomb. It's very personal,
Mm-hmm.
and I understand why that's important for the point that Nolan is making. I just think that I just am not motivated by Strauss. I don't feel compelled by him. So when so much of the movie at the end is hinging upon this, I get the point made, but I just don't think it's, for me, the best use of that screen time.
I also don't think that Strauss's, the kind of revelations we get at the end are not delivered in as seamless or subtle ways as the earlier delivery of like exposition is in the film. It's kind of just like he literally gets a monologue moment where he explains what he's done. And that's, I don't know, that's like a little hokey to me. But then, the characters then come out and we're kind of left at this point where we don't exactly know we do know what's going to happen to him. He gets canned. He doesn't get the job as a result of it. So yeah, I think Strauss is interesting to me up until he like reveals what's going on. And then the one thing that I think that is cool to think about, and it's just cool, is the personal grievance is affecting who is in control of the nukes and thus the worldwide grievance. And I think that like the step of like the individual choice and the individual little things like ballooning out to this great big scale of the world changing is something that the film is at least a little bit interested in discussing. Oppenheimer himself, I think, really is the main driver of that. His little quirks, he's quirked up. Like definitely
Quarks, maybe.
Yeah, his quarks and his
Science
neutrinos affect the world when it comes down to it.
Yeah, and killed a lot of people.
Killed a lot of people.
Correct.
Holy moly!
You wanted to weigh in on Lewis, Tucker?
Not really. I mean, I think I feel largely similar to Abram in that I like Downey's performance. I'm glad he's been given this chance to sort of re-center himself as an actor. And I think that the scenes between him and Alden Ehrenreich are pretty good, but I find that narrative so much less compelling because it is devoid of every other character we've had established up to that point. I mean, there are like a couple of characters that we recognize come into play much later in the film in that frame narrative, the black and white stuff with Strauss as the main character. But I feel that so much of the movie in its themes of science and progress and politics, for me, are contained enough within the other two narratives that the Strauss narrative doesn't really impact me that much. When I'm thinking of the politics stuff, I'm thinking of the way in which the potential communist element of him and the Cold War element play into the hearing that he's going into, and then how that plays into the conflicts that he has with Matt Damon and with Josh Hartnett. And so there's the politics that's in that part, and I don't really need Strauss in another point in time in my mind unrelated situation of him trying to become a cabinet member. Also adding on to those themes, it just is kind of like an external thing that doesn't really impact my enjoyment of the film in a significantly less capacity, but it does add, for me, less interesting runtime to where I'm like, by the end of the film, when that narrative is much more foregrounded, I'm like, I'm not as interested in this element. And I feel like we lose a little bit of momentum when we have to keep going back to Strauss's narrative, especially as we reach the end. But it's not that big of a deal, but I like it like significantly less. I'm significantly less engaged by anything that is the Strauss segments. And not because of Robert Downey Jr., just because the thematic and contextual elements of that are pretty disconnected from everything else.
Let me play defense here, or presumed Oscar winner Robert Downey Jr. and the sequences that he stars in. Because this is why I called out the sort of like online deal of like, oh, the last hour of Oppenheimer, I can take or leave. Let me tell you a little something different. I love the last hour of Oppenheimer. In fact, I would say it's the best hour of Oppenheimer. Because it all stems from, as Abram put it earlier, a petty grievance. And ultimately, we can talk about these things of world-shifting events and ideology, Cold War, capitalism versus communism, and all these things.
Yada yada yada.
But what brings it's like how they got Al Capone. What brings Oppenheimer down from this position of being on the Atomic Energy Commission? From now that he is filled with regret, maybe he could have shifted the way that that things were going with atomic energy in the late 40s, early 50s. He could have done all that, but why couldn't he? Because this one fucking guy had it out for him because he made a joke about sandwiches and beer at a Senate hearing he was at once.
And then he had David S. Malshin go through his trash and set up this thing.
And it all fucking spiraled out of there thanks to like McCarthyism and like the Red Scare and everything. And not only, dear viewer, I'm talking directly to the camera. Only does Robert Downey Jr. fucking devour these lines. He fucking gets in. He gets all the way back to the molar.
He gets sloppy with these lines.
He gets fucking. They're never sloppy. They're tight. When he's fucking like, if he could do it all over, he could do it again. and he's hitting every single fucking word of these things. It's electric. But also it's a petty grievance that casts a mighty shadow. Is what happens here. And it all culminates in these fucking dueling things where what Abram had said earlier about how they're technically not court cases, they're hearings, and how it spins back onto Robert Downey Jr. back onto Louis Strauss of like, we repeat the line of like, technically they're not indicting, they're just denying or whatever. The same thing he said when he was getting Oppenheimer in trouble. And yes, while Oppenheimer goes down, Louis Strauss goes down with him. Because Louis Strauss...
Mutually assured destruction.
Mutually assured destruction? Fucking thank you, Tucker. Fantastic point. Louis Strauss, while Oppenheimer is out for his means of, like, furthering scientific discovery, why is Louis Strauss want all this? Because he wants to accumulate power. We sort of paint him as this petty figure at the end of the day. A lowly shoe salesman, who's not so lowly after all, as he continually points out, who thinks that he has to be the most important guy in the room. He wants to ascend to a cabinet position, and where do you go from a cabinet position? Maybe he wanted to be president. Who's to say? But he just wants to accumulate power, as do many other people in this narrative. And he's brought down by his own hubris and by a young and upcoming senator from Massachusetts named John F. Kennedy, which I fucking love that line. It's so funny. But it all comes back to my thing of like, I fucking love this end sequence because it becomes like we get the turn of Louis Strauss as a fucking classic movie villain, where Robert Downey Jr. just gets to like turn it on and have fun with it.
And we also get like the sort of like Saw-esque, he was behind this the whole time.
Exactly. When we show the alternate shot of Dane DeHaan and David Dastmalchian, and he's sitting there on the couch, he's like, and that's when he gives the line of like, they're not indicting, they're just denying. It's fucking electric to me. I fucking love it so much.
I mean, I think you make a good point. One detail I really do like about the lowly shoe salesman, because when they first meet, when Oppenheimer and Strauss, well, actually, I think they knew each other, but when they're at the college where Strauss wants Oppenheimer to become the chairman or whatever it is.
The teacher, professor.
He's
giving him a job as a professor.
Faculty position.
It's the lead. It's the chairman.
Yeah.
Oh.
He Oppenheimer says, "Oh, so you started out as a lowly shoe salesman," and Strauss says, "Just a shoe salesman." But when at the end of the movie, he talks about how he's going to go back to just being a lowly shoe salesman, and I think that's a really smart, small dialogue choice that illustrates how deep into Strauss's head Oppenheimer has woven himself.
He's living in there rent free.
I want to pivot the conversation and ask Timo a question.
Okay, here we go.
Timo?
On our way out of the theater, we were talking about Emily Blunt's performance, nominated for Best Supporting Actress, and there's some disagreement across the table about Emily Blunt. What do you think about her?
What do you think of the Blunt?
Well, I think that Emily Blunt she's pretty good. I think that the film maybe underserves her a little bit. Like, she just isn't what's like super important about this film, and so I don't have like a huge amount of thoughts on her, because I feel like what this film wants me to think about are not necessarily her character moments. Her being around adds depth to Oppenheimer's character and makes him a bit more complex. Yeah, she's good, I guess.
Yeah. You're a gentleman and a scholar, and I completely agree with you. I do think she's good. And I do think the marital strifes and the thing with having to give his baby to another couple because they're so busy, and the way that she challenges him in the hearing sequences, I think that's all fantastic. I think she does a very good job. But my qualm is that I just don't feel like she's worthy of a Best Supporting Actress nomination when there's so many other performances that stick in my mind so much more. She's in like 20 minutes of this movie, and in most of that screen time just in the background. I think she's good, but she's like 9th on the performances that stick out to
Oppenheimer
me.
power ranking?
My Oppenheimer tier list.
Yeah.
She's in like C tier. Like, yeah, she's good.
Yeah.
But she really fades into the background for me. And even if we're talking about the sort of romantic and sexual relationships that Oppenheimer has, I think that Florence Pugh as Jean Tatlock absolutely stands out much more to me. But I do think she's good. It's just I was watching this movie under the knowledge that she was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, and I was like, I don't get it, man. Yeah. I don't get it, man. But May December was right there. What are we going on about?
Don't get me started. Don't get me started now. But yeah, I think the reason that she ascended to that position of having this nomination, and again, I want to say I think Emily Blunt is good in this movie. I think it's because she gets like 3 slam dunk scenes is essentially what Nolan gives her. Now Nolan, of course, always has the wife problem, as many people have identified in his films. He has some issues with his female characters. I don't even think that he would deny that, but I digress. She gets the scene after actually Jean Tatlock dies, where she has to go comfort the Killian in the forest at like dawn. She gets her like 16, 17. No, sorry, 18. Yeah. 18 years. I don't like your phrase, and that's she gets those moments that are like guaranteed crowd-pleasing moments in the theater. And then, of course, she gets a smaller moment, but at the very end, when it's like the mid-60s, actually, we get like this far jump ahead when Lyndon B. Johnson is president, and she's there, and she meets Teller again, and she refuses to shake his hand, which she reprimands Robert for doing earlier in the film. She gets these moments. She gets these moments more stand-up, like rah-rah Emily Blunt, she's a great actress moments than Florence Pugh gets, for example, even though I feel that, yes, historically and in the film, Jean Tatlock does pose a far more interesting foil to Robert Oppenheimer.
I don't disagree with you guys that there's a version of the movie where she's more prominent that makes her nomination even more deserved, but I think she's really essential to the film, and you shouted out most of the scenes that I think really make her sing, but there's one in particular that I don't think gets enough attention, and that's when she and Oppenheimer are riding out into the desert on their horses, and they stop, and she is talking about her husband who she married young.
Yep.
And she's recounting their marriage, and she's recounting his death in Spain, fighting the Spanish Revolution. And she has this line that I think is really, really important.
It's really good.
Where she talks about the only thing he died. He basically died
to stop a fascist bullet from hitting the mud.
Yes,
that's all he was good for.
Yeah, and I think the reason why that is such an important idea is because she is the least idealistic character in the narrative, and she is the most openly, personally driven. I mean, her entire anger towards Oppenheimer in the latter part of the film is that why aren't you standing up for yourself, not your work, not anything? Why aren't you standing up for us in our life? She is not clouded by any grand ambition. She's seen grand ambition kill her husband in the mud.
Yeah, she's seen ideology kill her husband in the mud. And that's obviously something that the film deals with as well, both in the dueling Cold War ideologies, as well as, an interesting... I love the line where Groves goes to Oppenheimer, and he's like, we can rely on one thing. Since Germany already has the lead on us, we can rely on one thing. Anti-Semitism. And he's like, Hitler called theoretical physics a Jewish science straight to Einstein's face, and like we can only hope that he has discounted it based purely on ideology. And ideology as like a blinding factor or something that like controls people's actions is something that runs obviously throughout Oppenheimer.
Yeah, and I think Nolan is smart to have it cut both ways because everything about McCarthyism is also bound to ideology and springs from it.
Of course.
Yeah. Can I pivot to a tiny bit to, I think, maybe the most unsung, but also, I think, most critical element of this film that blows me away every single time? Is I want to meet the casting director of Oppenheimer and suck on their hand. I'm not kissing it. I'm going all in on this.
I don't know. Hang on, I'll find this person. Don't worry.
Because I think that the casting choices in Oppenheimer are some of the most insane and inspired decisions that have ever happened in film history. Because you look at this cast list, and it's like 30 deep of names you recognize, but they're not the obvious choices. And that is what I love. We have 3 Best Actor winners in this list.
5 Oscar winners total in this cast.
And nominees way bigger than that.
Of course.
But 3 Oscar Best Actor winning actors in this movie. And their combined total screen time is like 7 minutes. They are given these little bit parts. Gary Oldman, Rami Malek doesn't even have a line, or he barely does.
He has like 2 lines in the movie.
And Casey Affleck only shows up like twice.
Pash, great.
And we have Best Director nominees in this, and Betty Safdie and Kenneth Branagh.
Yes, Matt Damon, I think, rounds out the 5 because he won screenplay.
Matt Damon's like one of the ones like, okay, that kind of makes sense. He's in this movie. But then we have the guy who was Roderick in the
Devin Bostic.
In the Darwin Kid movies. And
might know him from his role in Saw 6 as well.
True. And Josh Hartnett, who's a very unconventional choice for this character, for this kind of film. And Robert Downey Jr., sort of the crown jewel of that. Giving roles, important, dramatic, serious roles in a high-profile, dramatic, high-grossing, high critical acclaim movie to the people that you don't usually see get these kind of roles. And this is a career-defining moment for all of them, being part of this ensemble, but it goes so deep and the choices are so vast and they're coming from unconventional places that it really shows me that there's just so much more you can pull from than putting Denzel Washington in another dramatic movie or something. I mean, Denzel Washington's great, but the choices of going to Robert Downey Jr. and going to these people that you don't really think of as just supporting actors or in a movie like this that have been traditionally in comedies or action movies or adventure movies or whatever it is, and saying, we're putting together a team, a team of unlikely compatriots that are going to make Oppenheimer sing.
And what's brilliant about it is, and I would do this if we had the time, if you give me any one of those names, I could give you at least one, probably up to 3 or 4 great moments or great lines that I love from that person in particular. Even fucking Rami Malek, who has 2 lines in this movie, Christopher Nolan uses perfectly because what does he do? He's just there watching the whole time. He's just in the background. He's got
dropping his pens.
He's got a little clipboard or something, and he's just watching. You're like, why is Rami Malek here just to stand in the background and not do anything? And it's because he was paying attention. He was watching all of these events to testify before the Senate hearing committee.
Yeah.
At the end, he's like, actually, I was there, and I saw all this, and here's how it happened, and here's how it shook out. It's like, okay, it fucking makes sense that you would get that what Rami Malek's character was doing the whole time. Or even fucking the guy who plays Einstein. I fucking love the guy who plays Einstein.
He looks
Tom
like
Conti.
Einstein, bro.
It looks exactly like Einstein. These are actually sequences that one of the very few things that Nolan made up is that Oppenheimer didn't go to Einstein at these key moments. He went to some other scientist, but they had a friendship. But he knew, because Nolan knew that people know who Albert Einstein is. When Oppenheimer goes to talk to a guy about the impact of what he's done or whatever, he's going to go talk to Einstein. And he has a moment where he emerges from the shadows to inspire Oppenheimer at the very last moment to go into the last 30 minutes or whatever of his hearing and everything. It's fucking brilliant. The guy who plays Roderick, the look on his face when he's throwing up afterwards, it's haunting. And that puts the final pin at the moment of Oppenheimer after the gym scene that we already discussed. It's fucking phenomenal, dude. I love this ensemble.
Yeah. I think Robert Downey Jr., I'm going to shout it out. I mean, I think he actually has a really, really excellent performance. The performances in this movie are just off the charts, I would say. That's just about it. They're looking like a Russian...
Someone builds a bigger chart.
Yeah, they're looking like them Russian atomic tests being picked up by the radio spectrometry from space or whatever.
I am sorry.
I appreciated that.
A little.
I would understand it and heard it if this guy listened a little bit.
All right.
We haven't given.
I was looking at my notes.
We haven't given any love for one other crew member on this thing. I saw a meme that was pretty great. It was like a picture of someone looking all nervous and funky and like that, and it was me when Ludwig walks into the Oppenheimer composer auditions. That meme, dude, Ludwig Göransson has absolutely hit it out of the park. This score is bonkers nuts. I love it. It's it's so good. Just the way that the synths, it's electronic, but it's also kind of, down-tempo and subtle and a little bit cinematic. It's like that Nolan modern cinematic sound, turned up to 11 and really just cranking during the moments that it needs to be. It's lovely. I love it. Yes, I said that.
We mentioned Can You Hear the Music earlier, and whenever that plays, whether I'm watching it in action in Oppenheimer or I'm playing it on my laptop, I ask myself the same question every time. It's how is it possible that a human being wrote and performed this and that it sounds like this? It sounds fucking angelic.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I'm levitating every time I'm listening to it. It's simply one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard in my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's not like the score is just one thing over and over again.
Yeah.
It is actually a very varied score, but each piece actually ends up being memorable in its own right. I listened through the score on its own before I was nominated for Best Score, and then watching the movie, I'm like, wow, these musical cues stick out to me in very, very different ways. And there are some that come back as sort of thematic cues over and over again. But yeah, it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's one of the best scores of the year, and it deserves the win that it'll get. And Ludwig Göransson deserves his third win, which he'll get.
Yep.
Because he also did both the Black Panther scores, which
Oh, sure.
I mean, the sound design is also quite excellent. That scene that we were talking about at length earlier in the gym hallway, or the gym where he's freaking out, and the background sounds drop out. The moment right before the bomb explosion at the Trinity test is a great moment of sound design.
Shit, yeah. That is a big dick swinging moment of sound design.
Yeah.
Screw you, we know you want to hear it. We know you want your butt to shake in this theater, but we are going to hold it for 3.5 minutes or something ridiculous as you just see everyone react to it. It's so good. And I think one of my favorite sound design choices of recent memory is the way that they tie together three sounds into sort of what I'm going to coin now the Oppenheimer sound, which is the sound of a chugging train, of stomping feet, and of something else.
Is it like a buzzing? Like
no, it's the boom, 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 boom.
Oh.
Because maybe it's just a chugging train and stomping feet, or it's like it's like mechanical noise, but also mirrored with the stomping feet of people in the auditorium.
Mm-hmm.
It's this feeling of dread and progress that it plays throughout all these sequences that I think is the most iconic part of Oppenheimer's sound design, is matching together this sound of a deep, heavy train chugging noise with progress and with dread, and it has so much tied into it. I absolutely adore.
No, I just have a collection of notes here that I can just read off one sentence things that I love about Oppenheimer, but I don't want to do that if other people have other things to say about it first.
I want to hear
it at the end.
Yeah. Okay.
A collection of words.
A collection
Also
of
known as a
words.
sentence.
Let's find.
That's a little Oppenheimer review reference for those who may.
We're not paying
reference to
attention.
like 20 minutes earlier. The gloved hands on the back of Jean's head.
Oh, yeah. Interesting detail.
In the when we quickly cut back to her killing herself, maybe or not, maybe.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Oh, come on! If you just got a sentence, just say it.
Sorry. The way that Gary Oldman as Truman says Nagasaki.
Yeah.
Love that. I love that whole thing of when he reaches into his pocket and like waves a handkerchief in front of him.
He does it so condescendingly. I've never seen anyone deliver a
those
tissue in a
glasses
more
they've got him
snarky
wearing.
way.
His eyes are like bugging out. They're like really large. It's like,
Huge. And then get that crybaby out of here.
Yeah.
Another moment where Nolan breaks filmic form, where it's Oppenheimer naked in the hearing room and then Jean on top of him is a great moment.
Mm-hmm.
Mirroring, of course, very funny thing that Nolan does when he says the Oppenheimer quote while he's having sex with a woman and while she's holding the fucking the book, the Sanskrit book in front of her tits. It's fucking weird. I don't know.
that's a hell yeah moment in the movie for sure.
Yeah. When Isidore Robbie tells him to take off the military uniform.
Oh yeah.
I love that moment. And then we get the suit, the Oppenheimer suit up when he puts on the hat and he grabs
And he
his
goes,
pipe.
See, this is what my roommate is talking about when he says it's the Marvelization. Like, it's actually like making him look like a superhero. I don't know if that's like the bad thing, but the movie is completely doing it.
Yeah. I think that there's just a lot of things. Oh, one thing that I maybe wanted to just quickly mention is I don't know if I subscribe to this at all, but this idea of Nolan making this movie about him and the atomic bomb is the Dark Knight and what it does to superhero movies in Hollywood. That's a thing
that is some film Twitter horseshit if I ever heard it. There's no way that's intentional.
I don't know. It's a thing that people say. I find it very entertaining to think about, at least.
Yeah, maybe.
That's ridiculous.
I'm punching in.
So the last thing I'll say, my sort of closing thought, to kind of actually return to this idea of like Marvel-fying, as we'll use this term, history. Denis Villeneuve has been obviously doing his victory laps for Dune 2, and he's been giving a lot of really interesting interviews talking about his philosophies on filmmaking, and also talking in one of these about the length of Dune 2 and citing Oppenheimer, and talking about how movies like Dune 2 and Oppenheimer resonate with a younger audience despite their length. And I think what both of the movies do, but we're talking about Oppenheimer, sort of focusing on that, is find a way forward for storytelling of this length that respects attention spans, even though ours are broken, by finding these filmic techniques, whether it is these little moments that play on this more pop culture visual language that obviously Nolan helped to pioneer with his Batman movies, but also just editing in a way that keeps you engaged. I think that this is an incredibly smart film. The whole scene with the Sanskrit, you might call it heavy-handed, and it is in some ways, but in others, I think it's not. I think the way that it takes this quote and marries it with this idea of personal pleasure requires a second of stepping back and analysis. I think Nolan does a lot to not compromise the intellectual integrity and rigor of this story while filmically constructing it in a way that is enjoyable for everybody. I mean, I took my sister to see this movie when it came out, and my sister she's 18, so it's not like she's 7, but she doesn't watch a lot of movies. If we were watching a show, she's watching TikTok the whole time, right? But she found it very enjoyable. I think that
Subway Surfers in the corner.
I think that this is a sort of
This Oppenheimer boring I have.
I think Oppenheimer is the least pretentious but most rigorous version of this story you can tell.
Sure.
And I think that it presumably winning Best Picture, even though it's not my favorite of the nominees, there's a couple I like more than that. I think it is really a high watermark for how you can tell a story like this and take your audience seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is as we were starting this review, I had one thing on my mind is I fully expect to get a new AFI Top 100 in a couple of years of greatest American films and have this being like the top 25. Of this just being not only a defining cultural moment, but defining cinematic moment, winning a bunch of awards, bringing a iconic filmmaker to a new level of status, showing that a drama can be a high-grossing movie. Like, everything about this film, I feel like, represents the best of current filmmaking. It's using all the techniques. Nolan is pushing things forward. It's making a bunch of money. It's pulling people back into theaters in a way that very few movies have since the pandemic. And it's just also really well acted and really well edited. And the sound design and the score and the cinematography, everything is so good. And the reason I gave this movie an 8 when I walked out of the theater this last time. And it was because the spit in my mouth had soured a little bit. The sour taste. It's the whole thing. As I walked out, because I'm like, I really don't care about that last 35, 40 minutes of this movie. But then we're just talking this movie, I'm like, well, I love everything else about it. No, this is a 9 out of 10. Like, my talking about this movie really cemented, like, okay, even if this one section of the film doesn't engage me as much, everything else is still so goddamn good that my thoughts on Oppenheimer just continue to raise as we praised it.
Absolutely. Should we tabulate scores?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay.
3,
Actually, mine's already in.
2, 1. Beep, boop, beep, boop.
It's not a race.
It is.
It's not an arms race.
Might be.
Oh.
Numbers race.
Numbers race. We have our number. It is 9.1. The point breakdown is, which would actually put it at the number 3 spot on our list. 3.
Number 3.
Yeah.
Shit.
9.1. It is comprised of my score. I gave it an 8.5. Abram gave it an 8.7. Tucker gave it a 9.1, which he revised down from his 9.2 that was sitting in the thing.
Yeah, I just didn't want it to be tied with the holdovers.
Oh, he's metagaming. And then Tanner...
I don't like having my movies. There's only 10 movies. I can make them a
I
little
don't
bit
know. I
different.
don't like that. I think we should have to litigate that.
No, before any of you even put it in, I had it moved down 0.1 point. That's not even a movie.
Wait, what do you mean? What do you mean tied with the holdovers?
I gave the holdovers 9.2.
Oh, your personal score.
Yes, I didn't change the score.
That was ill-explained.
Timo, screw you. You put me in hot water for no reason. I did something.
Have some ice.
Not wrong.
Cool down. It's all right. Tanner gave it a 10.
Yeah.
So that rounds out every...
My third
not
10.
Gonna stay cool and
Third
keep warm.
10 for the nominees this year, by the way.
Yeah, it's a good year. Do we want to just briefly discuss that this is going to win everything and what that means?
Well, yeah. I was going to pose this. As a gambling question to you, gentlemen.
I say bet.
Over
I say
gambling,
bet.
like
You don't
in
need to ask me the
Oppenheimer?
question. I'm in. Money down.
Over under 7.5 Oscars for Oppenheimer.
What do you mean half?
Well, so then you can say 7 or 8. Or
That's how over under works.
yeah.
Sorry.
Is
I
it
want to
what
put
it-
it on a number.
I
then.
understand.
Yeah.
Over under 7.5 Oscars.
On 7.5.
Over.
They
I'm
take a
going over.
bandsaw on stage and just cut.
I agree with Timo. I'm going to say over.
Over.
Yeah.
I think it'll get at least 8. Yeah.
I'm gonna go 7.
7.
I'm gonna go 7.
Okay, 7 or 8. Or maybe more. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well.
And do you want to actually go through the ranking as it stands now?
Yes. Yeah.
Good
Since
idea.
we are nearly
I feel
done.
like we should do that at the end of our episode.
Yeah, why not? The ranking,
doing it.
as it stands right now, let me move Mr. Oppenheimer into its right spot. There we go.
Yes.
At the top. No, not at the top. We start at the bottom over here.
Number 8.
At number 8, we've got American Fiction. At number 7, we've got Maestro. And then above that, The Zone of Interest. And then above that, we've got The Holdovers. At spot number 4 is Poor Things. And then spot number 3, Oppenheimer, just went there. Spot number 2 is Killers of the Flower Moon. And spot number 1 is still Past Lives. So,
I don't know if Past Lives is gonna get dethroned on our list here. I don't think it will.
well, we've only
for
got
me.
A couple films left. So next week, I was hinting at it. I was hinting at it at the beginning of this review that we would
That's right.
pair this film with another film. Of course.
You can't divorce these two films. They are forever entwined. And we are just sort of
Never the twain shall meet.
And never the twain shall meet, but the twain are meeting.
Because we're doing Anatomy of a Fall.
Yeah, no, we are of course doing Barbie. We're completing the Barbenheimer dual review here.
We're actually going with the order that is the word that I initially posed for the combination of two movies, Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
Oppenheimer.
Before Barbenheimer really caught on.
Yeah. I did come out with that before.
The genius comedic mind of Tucker Hazel. That's why you keep it tuned here. Well, we're gonna relive that movie's summer fantasy of the Barbie film, as well as Barbenheimer. I don't know. There's nothing more to talk about Barbenheimer now that it's come and gone. It was an event. It was major. We went to the movies because of it. Well, there we go. Okay. Next time, Barbie. Thanks for talking about Oppenheimer. Big movie, big episode of Quest. We will be back.
Same back time, same back channel.
That's damn right. You know what I always say? Stay tuned here. Keep cool. Stay warm. Peace.
Stay tuned here. Stay cool. Stay cool. Peace.
Don't walk on any yellow lines. Make sure you're crossing.
What are you talking about?
You can't pass on a solid double yellow line.
Don't step on a crack. You'll break your mother's back.
No fish before 7 p.m.
Don't wear white after Labor Day.
Don't
We'll see you
swim
next time.
after a full meal.